All right, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are dialing in from today. We're so excited that you have joined us for today's panel called What is Non-Binary? Simple Ways to be Inclusive of Our Non-Binary Colleagues and Friends and anybody who is around us who identifies as non-binary. I'm really excited again that you've chosen to be here with us. I believe that you are able to see my screen, maybe some thumbs up from, yeah, okay, good. I'm going to introduce you to my colleagues here in a second, give them a chance to introduce themselves. First, my name's Megan Pollock, and my company is called Engineer Inclusion. And so, however you found your way to this event, I'm really thrilled to have you. I am an engineer by training. My background's in computer science and engineering, and then in 2009, I switched from widgets to workshops and have never looked back. I shifted my work to really figuring out how do we create more inclusive and equitable environments where women, people of color, and people of all non-dominant identities can not only feel valued and affirmed and encouraged, but can thrive in environments like engineering. And so that's really where I focused my work on. And so today we are going to be talking about non-binary. And so if you need a definition for that, it's a term for people who don't identify or subscribe to the gender binary of woman or man. And non-binary people, sometimes called NB or NB, they face many challenges as they strive to live authentically, but they also face many joys in that. And so today I want to make sure that we're talking about the joy of pulling away from those gender constructs and really living in a liberating kind of way. And so really what I want to make sure that you take away from this conversation is I want you to hear the stories of Leslie and Frederick, but I want you to take away strategies. I want you to take away something that you can do. I want you to sort of shift the way maybe that you think about others and think about the systems and the constructs that all of us live in and learn to perform within. More importantly, I want you to think about systems. It's not just what happens between me and you and me and somebody else. I want us to think about the systems that we are a part of and the systems that we withhold and continue to uphold some of those systems and structures that continue to oppress people. And until we begin to sort of build our little Superman X-ray vision to look into these systems and start to think about the experiences of others, we can't begin to remove those barriers and add in the proper supports that help everyone to be their authentic selves. And so again, I'm really excited that you're here with us. What you can expect from this conversation is I'm going to have the focus here on Leslie and Frederick. I've got a set of Slido polls that are going to allow you an opportunity to engage and see some of the questions. So we want you to contribute in a way that is helpful to you. And so if you've never done a Slido poll, it's really easy. If you have a smartphone, you can do that, or you can go on your browser, or however you prefer. I like to do it on a smart device because it's separate. So just open up the camera, hold it over the QR code, open it up in whatever device it is, and you'll notice when you open up that page, there's going to be two columns. There's going to be a Q&A column and then the polls column. So this Q&A section that you're going to see, it's not going to pull up really easy to see. That's where you can type questions, and we're going to be checking that as we go along. But the polls, I'm going to have some live polls, and I'm going to go ahead and start the first one. And that's just an opportunity for you to introduce yourself and to kind of get used to the platform. And so you can try this out. And while you all are introducing yourselves and sharing with us why you've chosen to be here today, I want to turn it over to my colleagues, Frederick and Leslie, to introduce themselves. So this was originally something that Frederick and I dreamed up, this conversation. So Frederick, why don't you start us off and introduce yourself and why you wanted to have this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having us on, Megan. It's really good to see you again. Hi, y'all. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them in English and lay and ella in Spanish. I am a white non-binary person. I've got long blonde hair and the sides of my head are shaved. I'm wearing black glasses and, excuse me, a rainbow striped sweater that doesn't have any yellow in it. And my background is a gray wall. I am currently on Nisenan and Miwok land, otherwise known as Sacramento, California. I'm originally from this area and I came out as non-binary. I guess there wasn't like one particular like coming out point. It's kind of been a gradual process. But I like for me, the culmination of my coming out was coming out to my parents. Even though I am a 37-year-old fully grown adult human, my parents still have a huge influence over my life. And I came out to them by buying them both t-shirts that say, I love my non-binary child. Like, you don't have a choice. So I know you're going to continue to love me, and here you go. We're still working on pronouns, but yeah, it's been a process. I started questioning my gender. I started questioning the social construction of what it means to be a woman in junior high, and started applying the analysis and like the actual questioning to me as a human person in probably like 2014. And so this is like, it's not something that people take lightly. And it really does influence like every aspect of my life and how I move through the world. And so I was grateful for Megan to offer this platform for us to have this conversation. Because I think one of the coolest things about non-binary is that like none of us have the same definition. And so like it is this like universal, not universal, but it's this like commonly understood community term. And we all kind of like, we're all like in on it together, like all of us non-binary folks, but it means something different for all of us. And so it's a really neat place to be. And Leslie, I would love to hear your answer to Megan's question too.
Hi, everyone. Please let me know if you can't hear me for any reason, but um, yeah, wanted to also start off with a visual description. And part of that is, as Frederick beautifully did, is really just to make sure that folks who aren't able to see for various reasons can kind of just be in the same space with us. So my name is Leslie. I use they, she pronouns. I am a Black person wearing clear rimmed glasses that I love so much. Very first time kind of exploring outside of my usual glasses realm. I have short locks and I'm wearing a zebra print long sleeve with blue overall kind of dress. And my background is a little chaotic. I'm still kind of settling into my apartment, but there's some mirrors around, a pride flag hanging off of my little organizer on the wall. But so happy to be in this space. And I really, really appreciate, Frederick, you kind of framing that for a lot of us who are non-binary, it means so many different things to us, and it looks and has been an individual and unique journey. So really excited to just be able to be in this space and share my story, share my experiences. A little of a background about me. I wrote some things down because I am a very forgetful person. I'm originally from New York, and lived in New York, and then also lived in Ghana, West Africa for a brief moment in my childhood before coming back to New York. And yeah, was a New Yorker all the way up until grad school. And grad school for me was also around the time that I came out as non-binary, and that coming out moment, similar to Frederick, has been a very like, there wasn't a clear point, but there was a point where I felt safe enough and fortunately had a community that I could actually share my identity with. So my pivotal like moment with coming out as non-binary was really because I was in community with a lot of, not a lot, but some other Black and brown trans folks who just allowed me to learn more about gender, allowed me to feel safe questioning things that I grew up thinking or always being aware of, but didn't have the name, didn't have the language, didn't have the space or the safety to even like recognize. So I grew up in a household that's Ghanaian and with three younger brothers, and in a household that was very gendered, very traditional in terms of gender roles, what a woman is supposed to do, what a man is supposed to look like. And gender was always something that I was thinking about, but growing up never aligned with what that looked like and what I felt. So just really excited to kind of just get to share a little bit more about my experience with the questions that we will be discussing. But a little bit about why I wanted to be on this panel is I am someone who identifies as a sibling, as a partner, as someone who's gender nonconforming. And that has looked in various ways. And a lot of times has been kind of things that I've explored in isolation, especially thinking about other folks who are gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, who are Black. There isn't a huge representation. And as I was questioning a lot, and even now, as I'm still kind of exploring a lot about myself, there isn't a huge community that I get to do that with. So wanted to be on this panel as part of the increasing representation, but also just sharing my story, knowing that my story isn't my own. There's so many other folks with identities like me, similar to me, that are experiencing life differently and just wanted to uplift our experience. So really excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Frederick and Leslie, and thank you for leading by example with the visual descriptions. I love that one of my weaknesses is I sometimes, my engineer brain just jumps to the agenda, and then sometimes I forget to prioritize those things, so thank you for that. I'll add, so my pronouns are she or they, and while I identify as a woman, it's important for me to begin to normalize the use of they as a pronoun, and so that's what I choose to do as an example. I grew up in Southeast Texas and I just moved back after 21 years. And so that's been quite the adventure. And I grew up in a deeply gendered family, meaning women cook and clean and men do, you know, all the outside things. And so even as a child, so I pushed many gender boundaries. I was a three-time national champion powerlifter. So if you can imagine what that looks like in very Southern conservative families. My grandma was always very displeased with that. I became an engineer, you know, very few women are engineers. So I chose lots of things that pushed on gender norms. And so like Frederick, it was something I began to really interrogate early on, but didn't even understand that gender was a construct, meaning it's something that we all have co-created until I was in my 30s. And so hopefully you will take away again, part of this conversation is that there are differences between sex and gender. And today what we are really talking about is gender. It's what you are assigned at birth, and you often assigned at birth and begin to are given lots of different signals as to how that should look in your household, and what that looks like in your life. And so again, thank you to all of the people who participated in the Slido poll. Pam, I'm grateful that you're here. Eileen, Melissa, Brad, and Alexander, and Bella, and Lou, and Solar. So thank you so much for participating. And I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to keep the polls open as we go throughout. So you'll see those on your screen, but I want us to be able to really focus on the conversation here, and then I'll pop those screens back up as we go throughout. So my visual identity, identify as woman. I have really long brown hair. I am in my home office in Orange, Texas, and to my right, you can't see it, is a beautiful lake, and then I've got this blue painted wall that I obsess over that line that I painted in between it, and too often keep coming back and perfecting it. And I have brown sort of signature horn rim glasses that have somehow become part of my identity as well. So with that, and I do want to acknowledge that here in Orange, Texas, we are on the land, the unceded land of the Ishtok and Coshawty and Alabama peoples. And I've been learning a lot about those indigenous groups because I was not taught that in school growing up. And so that's been part of my journey of returning back home. So with that, let's dive in. So Leslie and Frederick, as we talked about in preparation for this, I'm just going to let you two just take a stab at whatever just sort of grabs you first. So let's first start talking about what is non-binary.
Let's start with an easy question, Leslie.
I can start us off. So I was doing a lot of reflection and trying to come up with this beautiful definition. And yeah, as I'm being most honest with myself, I think when I think about what is non-binary, it really comes down to knowing truly like within myself that I'm not like I'm not male or female or man or woman. I don't necessarily fit like the binary that we, for the most part, all kind of been socialized to believe, thinking that like you're assigned a sex at birth and that is going to align with like what you live out, what you wear in terms of clothes, what you express your gender as, and so on. Um, with that said, also want to make sure that there isn't a confusion of non-binary being you fit somewhere in that like that line. So looking at gender as looking at my gender identity is beyond this like line, the spectrum that we have, and really knowing that it's fluid for me, changes week to week. Sometimes it changes like how I look, how I present myself. It's very fluid, and it's really hard to kind of be like, oh well, it's 50% this and 60% that or whatever. Instead, it's really just my way of living. It's my way of being most honest with myself, of being most authentic with myself, and just experiencing the world without like feeling like I'm playing a role that I'm supposed to play.
And Leslie, are there other gender identity labels that you use?
But yeah, that's a good question. I really mostly just use gender non-binary. With the term envy, that's something that I'll like toss in once in a while, but I really mostly identify as someone who's gender non-binary or gender non-conforming, depending on what the day, what the year looks like, what the month looks like. I will also say with that too, though, sometimes, and this can be like a gray area, but I have been socialized and raised in a world where a lot of the experiences of Black women have been my experiences. Even now, as someone who's gender non-binary, like I still resonate a lot with the struggle, with the joy, with all of the journey that a lot of Black women experience. And that's something that I like even now don't remove from who I am, but I am more than that. So Black women and like the experience of Black women, I think that it's a community that I sometimes feel very safe in and sometimes don't feel safe in, but it's something that has been a significant part of my life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that especially for those of us who like didn't come out as non-binary until we were adults, we've been socialized as the gender that aligns with the sex that we were assigned at birth. And so like all of those like years of socialization that we have, like being told like this is how you do the thing with the body that you have, like that doesn't go away when we like realize that we are non-binary. um yeah, I use a lot of labels. I'm bisexual, and I always joke like you can't make me choose. Like, so I am non-binary, and I use non-binary as like the primary label for my gender identity because I think it's the one that more people understand and is a better like quick indicator for people that like I'm not a woman, because when people look at me, like that's what they think. Um, because if I tell people that I'm trans, a lot of people are like, "Are you a trans woman?" I'm not. I'm a trans non-binary person. Um, Gender queer is my favorite label, but I don't use it that often because most people don't understand what it means. But I love the word queer, and I love like gender queer as a concept and as a term. But the most accurate term for me is probably agender, which means that I like don't have an experience of gender for myself. Like I describe my gender as the shrug emoji, like, like what the hell even is this? Like, like all these people talk about gender, and I'm like, I don't get it. This is my literal job. So if you don't get it either, you're fine. Like you're in the right place. We're here to sort it out. But yeah, so non-binary, the definition of non-binary that I use is like not fully formed and very mushy and nebulous, but basically it's just like anything, any way that an individual understands their own gender that is not exclusively male or female in the way that like men and women have been constructed in their understanding of society. And so one of the things that's important for me and has been helpful for me in like figuring my own stuff out is thinking about how like women are socialized in different cultures. And so like in the US, because of white supremacy, we tend to think of like white womanhood, like June Cleaver, as like what women should be. And there are very, very insidious, like capitalist reasons that that is what we think of as what women should be. But then if you go to other countries and in other cultures, women have been socialized to have very different roles. And so because of that, that's the easiest way to know that these like gender traits and gender roles that people have aren't innate. Like it's not, there's not something about having a vulva that says like you have to cook. Like that's not how this works. So there's a lot of things that are like mixed up in that. And I know I said a lot of different things, but one of the resources that I'm going to drop in the chat and that I know Megan will add to engineering inclusion afterwards is a professional development training that is through Out Youth, which is the Central Texas LGBTQ Youth Center. The training is called Be a Beacon. It's a 3-level asynchronous training intended for K-12 school staff in Texas, but it's a really great overview of just like LGBTQ stuff. And you can get all 3 levels, which is just under 9 hours of training for like $80. So it's a steal. And like there's some really good like 101 stuff. And then the last section is integrating intersectional queer content into curricula. And it's like a super deep dive of LGBTQ history and present. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So if you want more info on like the history and the like terms and like how all that stuff breaks down, it's a really good primer for that. So I'll add that to the chat.
Thanks. So I want to make sure and highlight a key term that both Leslie and Frederick have both used, and that's of intersectionality. So if you know anyone who has watched Fox News, they've gotten the wrong definition of what this is. But what intersectionality really is looking at all of the different kinds of identities that we can have. And so what it truly is saying is that it's this interconnected nature, this interrelationship between more social locations and how those things affect us, right? So you can't parse apart the experiences of gender and race. You can't parse apart the experiences of socioeconomics and gender because they're always going to overlap to influence your experience. And so they can create overlapping systems of advantage or disadvantage. So we have to begin to think about those things. And there are lots of different, again, dimensions of how intersectionality affects us. And so as you're listening to the stories of Frederick and Leslie, and as you know, whatever stories that people add in the chat and on the Slido, always be thinking that we can never generalize and say all non-binary people, because that's never going to truly, you know, depict the lived experiences of these people, because all of these identities, none of us are single entities, right? And so we always want to keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that you brought up, Frederick, was the sort of question of you know, trans. So can you articulate for our audience, how is non-binary different than trans?
Yeah, so there's a really good visual that I meant to look up, and my ADHD got the better of me before this. But so you've probably seen, it's like a graphic of an umbrella. It's like LGBTQI, like all of the entire alphabet. And then under that umbrella, there's 2 other umbrellas. You've got like trans, and then I think like sexual orientation might be the other one. But so trans is an umbrella term, and non-binary is an umbrella term, and LGBTQ is an umbrella term. So we're just like layers and layers and layers of umbrellas. It's never going to rain on us. So trans means that your experience of your gender does not align with the sex that you were assigned at birth. So cisgender, like this term cis means on the same side, and trans means on the other side. And so transgender means that you are on the other side of the gender. So it's an imperfect language. But basically, trans is your experience of your gender does not align with the gender and sex that you were assigned at birth. Um, Non-binary is outside male and female, which are the like two main ways that we're socialized as like to have gender in this country and in a lot of countries around the world. Um, but that wasn't always the case. One of my favorite like factoids to throw at people is that before colonization, many, if not most, of the indigenous people on Turtle Island, which is the continent of North America, is what we call it today, had like 3 to 5 genders, just like as a rule. And so this idea that like there's only two, you only have these two options, is relatively new and also really, really deeply tied to anti-Blackness and capitalism. And I know one of the resources that Leslie brought up for this conversation is I think it's the book, yeah. Alok Vaid Menon is one of the most amazing non-binary voices on the internet, and that book is amazing. But they also, like, if you follow them on Instagram, they do book reports on like really dense like academic texts and break them down into really lovely, digestible, bite-sized pieces. And they do an amazing job of helping like understand the analysis of how like anti-Blackness was the frame for this really like rigid gender binary. Highly recommend. Did I answer your question at all?
Yeah, you did. And Leslie, I saw that you unmuted. Did you want to add something?
Yes, sorry. My brain is also all over the place, but I put Alex on social media, their Instagram in the chat, but just wanted to, yeah, when it comes to the difference between non-binary and trans, I think something that you'll hear, I'm sure Frederick and I say quite a lot during this, is that terms are very unique and specific to the folks using those terms. So there are some folks who identify as trans who also identify as non-binary, and there are some non-binary folks who identify as trans also, and some that are like don't identify. And there isn't a right or wrong. I think it all comes down to that, like that respect of what term is the person you're talking about, the person you're talking to using for themselves, and really respecting whatever language they're using, because that is something that fighting to figure out the language for most is not easy. So just respecting whatever decision, whatever term they're using.
Yeah, so in hearing both of you share, it makes me, the word that sort of distills down is questioning. And why I come to that is it's questioning the institutions that led us to a binary, right? It's questioning how did we allow ourselves to so deeply subscribe to these sort of gendered norms? You know, you mentioned June Cleaver and all of those kinds of things. And questioning, does, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, asking and questioning, does this work for me, right? Does this, whatever performance I'm doing, whether it's your hair, your makeup, your clothes, whatever, your activities, does this work for me? Or I don't know, that's just what it keeps coming down. And when I think about, so for those people who don't know me, I've told everyone, but like I'm in the process of adopting some teenagers from the Child Protective Services. And so I'm thinking about what kind of mom do I want to be? And my answer always comes back to my goal is to raise children that think and question, right? Because so often we've been conditioned to don't question the institutions, don't question power, you just subscribe to it and keep moving. And for me, what I love about hearing both of what the stories that you shared is this space that either you created for yourself or somehow was enabled to you to begin to really think and say, does this work for me? And so how does someone come to, how did you come to become non-binary? Like, what was that? And again, some of you shared that in your introductions a little bit, but what's the difference? So let me add two-part questions here. So what's the difference between coming to the space of like, I'm non-binary, gender, you know, queer, agender, all these things. And how is that different from like, I just want to do things that cross gendered norms? Like, what's the difference?
That's a great question. And before I turn the platform over to Leslie to answer, I did want to tell you one of the most frightening experiences I had when I was living in Texas. I was in Austin, and I was at an Austin Independent School District school board meeting. And the discussion was around sex education. And Austin was one of the first districts in Texas that was trying to implement inclusive sex education, even though the curriculum they had didn't actually include the word bisexual, but better than what it had been before. But there were all of these people testifying that on a number of things that were very untrue and pretty far out there. But the thing that was the scariest for me was that this person who appeared to be a man, a father, went up and was upset and angry and said, "They're trying to teach our children to think for themselves." And it just knocked the wind out of me. Like, yeah, yes, that is literally what we're trying to do. Like, how is that a bad thing? Like, I was just so taken aback by that comment. And your comment, Megan, about like what kind of, mom do you want to be? Like, you want to raise children who can think for themselves. There are actively people out there who do not want their children to be able to think for themselves. And so I think these kinds of conversations are really important to be having. But yeah, Leslie, I would love to hear your response before I jump back in.
Yeah, I can start us off, and I might forget some things and hop back in after you go. But in terms of how does one come to be, how have I come to be non-binary? It's actually a term that when I first came out, I think that there was still some internal oppression, internal like stuckness, internal doubt, internal messiness, a lot that I was like, do I have the right to use this word for my own experience? Do I have the right to identify this way? And a lot of that came from like the very few people that I had access to, or very few like, yeah, other non-binary folks that I saw at the time. I think that I would get in my head and be like, well, I don't always look androgynous. I don't like physically always present in this way that will like make it obvious to other people. And I think I was more focused on like, how will others perceive me, and will they think that I'm valid? Will they think that my experiences are valid? And less about like, how do I actually feel? And what helped me a lot was really my community of other like BIPOC, non-binary folks, trans folks who have experienced a lifetime of being told like, you're not supposed to be this way. And they still were courageous. They still like felt safe enough in their own ways, and like would create like, even if it was just fleeting moments of safety, like they found those ways and found each other, and I found them and was able to like just question myself without that shame, without that felt like that guilt, without that like pressure to have an answer that would appease other folks. So I think what helped me a lot was exploration, but also having community that I felt safe, like talking about how like I knew that there was more. I know that there is more. I just like don't know if this will be accepted, or if people will even respect me and so on. And I like was able to share those concerns. And also like social media was really helpful with just having access to other folks. Also growing into their identities and figure out themselves. But to your question about how can it be different from just, yeah, I guess going beyond assigned like gender norms and what like the norms are. I think for me, like growing up with three brothers, I naturally like adopted and picked up on things that like didn't fit what I was supposed to do, which would be very frustrating to my parents, for sure. But I saw that they could just exist as themselves and didn't have to explain it, or most times they didn't have to like rationalize it. And I think like as I was seeing that growing up, like I would do things that like span across gender norms without a lot of like question to it. So it wasn't something that like was new for me. But I think what was new and what was that turning point was having a moment to be like, okay, well, I'm noticing this happen quite a lot, or I'm noticing that when I'm like hearing things about like Black women or hearing things about whoever, like that's not only like that's not just who I am. Like there's so much more than that. And I had the space and um the space which as I'm saying that, I think that that also is something that was a journey. So for me, in coming out in 2019, that was a very pivotal moment because I was fortunate enough to move out of state, move from where my parents live, where I like grew up, to Michigan, where I am now. And I was able to like actually do some intentional reflection, really connect with myself and like ask myself those deep questions and have a therapist, have a partner, have communities that like allowed me to do that without shame.
There's so much in this, and yeah, my experience is very similar. Like at first, like not wanting to like use the label trans and like not feeling like I deserved it. Like I and like I think some of it was probably like internalized transphobia, but some of it was also like not wanting to like pull focus from trans people whose experiences like from an outside perspective like felt more like severe. Um, so I I don't have gender dysphoria, and I was definitely like early in my understanding or my like actual questioning of my own gender. Um, I was like of the belief that like to be trans, like you had to experience gender dysphoria, that this was kind of required. And basically, gender dysphoria is just like a really like deeply um, felt like discomfort with your like physical body as it relates to your gender. That's probably a really simplistic definition, um, but I don't have any problem with this vessel. Like this is fine. Like I, like it's all stardust. It's fine. Um, my issue with gender has always been how other people perceive me, and the limitations that people try to place on people based on their appearance. Um, so when I started questioning my gender, I was like gender queer was the label that I was most comfortable with because again, I love the word queer. I was still like using she and her pronouns and was telling people like, yeah, she, they, whatever. And like, of course, no one was using they, them pronouns for me because I gave them the option. And I think the experience of living in another country and using another language that doesn't have gendered pronouns was really profound for me. I lived in Turkey for 2 years, and Turkish only has one third person singular pronoun. It's just the letter O. Everybody, doesn't matter who they are. And so like knowing that that was an option, like linguistically, grammatically, like, like this is, it is possible. That kind of like planted the seed. And then I had a non-binary coworker who used Z here pronouns. And I would occasionally like ask hear questions about gender and like, how do you know if you're trans and these kinds of things. And Z recommended like a workbook for me that I never bought. It's probably still like in my shopping cart somewhere. But Z said something one time about her own journey that when you like get in that space where you're questioning so much, you get to the point where you're like, these are not cis thoughts. And that phrase stays with me so much. Like there are so many things that I do, in a given month. I'm like, these are not cis thoughts. And it's hard to say, like it's hard, because I'm agender and because like I don't understand like what people mean when they say like they have this like felt sense of gender. I am probably not the best person to explain it, but I think that the difference between just like bucking gender norms and like feeling like your gender assignment is wrong. It's just how you feel, because there are definitely like butch women who, you know, like have short hair and only wear pants and never wear makeup and work on trucks and all these things. But they still feel like women. They still identify as women. And so like that's how they feel. And it's really difficult to explain gender, like if you're like trying to remove it and make it this like logical cerebral thing. But yeah, I think that same coworker, one of the reasons that it took me a little bit longer to come out than it might have otherwise, they, Z said something at one point, you know, if you're going to come out, you have to be ready to correct people every time they get your pronouns wrong. And it was so discouraging. And it's true, it's 100% true. Because if you intermittently correct people, they're more likely to mess up. And so if you're going to correct people, you have to do it every time, and it's exhausting. And I'm terrible at it. Like literally, I'm so bad at it. But it's true. Like you do have to be like ready to do that, and it's okay if you're not. You can still come out as non-binary, and you can still be non-binary even if you're terrible at correcting people when they misgender you. Really good when you misgender someone else. Like I will let you know right away, but I just can't advocate for myself in the same way. I'm working on it. But yeah, so it's a tough question. Like there's a lot of things that go into gender, but so much of it is just like your felt sense of like, what do you feel like? Like, what is your gender?
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Leslie and Frederick. I want to jump over to some of the comments that people have shared in the Slido. So let me go there. So a couple of things were shared. Let me go back to the previous slide. So somebody added, what is non-binary? And someone said it's a gender identity that lives outside those established man-woman binaries. They clarified that it isn't a third gender, but rather this umbrella term. And that's similar to what Frederick was saying. And it does not conform to the existing binary experiences. It does not conform to the sex you were assigned at birth, and does not conform to the existing binary experiences. And then someone also added this next prompt I put up on the screen. What are some common misconceptions? That androgyny is a requirement, that we all use they, them pronouns, that we are just indecisive or want attention, that we don't exist. I have a colleague who believes this, but last I checked, I'm still on this mortal plane. Yeah, so starting to think about some of these misconceptions, you know, aligns to what Leslie was saying of like, am I non-binary enough, right? And so both of our guests mentioned the term, I want to click over to a slide here. They both mentioned the term internalized. And so I want to position that and help you, those people who don't know what that means. So internalized is a form of oppression that's at no fault of that person, but it's because of all of the external oppression that's been placed on them or us, right? And so I like the 4I framework of thinking about interpersonal. So that's things that happen between people and their interactions. It could be language, it could be body language, it could be any kind of interaction. Ideological is the foundation of all of these. The ideological would be, in this case, like there are two genders, right? Like that's an ideology. Ideology that you are either this or that. And ideologies that one gender is better than another, hashtag patriarchy, right? And so these are ideologies that are insidious parts of our culture. And even though many of us might claim to be, you know, like great feminist, many of us are still likely to have internalized oppression from a system that told us that we don't have equal rights, right? And so that affects how we show up. And then institutional, this fourth eye, this is how all of this shows up into, I realize I'm not sharing my screen. The institutional is how all of these ideologies, the people that manifest those ideologies, how they then employ them in the systems that begin to further marginalize and exclude. So institutionalized oppression around gender identity would mean mean, like, we only ask, are you man or woman, right? Like, that's an institutionalized policy that doesn't allow for anything other than, when we don't allow people to use the name that they want, right? When we, don't allow any kind of space. Those are examples of ways that this oppression has been institutionalized in those systems. And so again, when we think about the experiences of non-binary people, any identity that's not of a dominant group, they're experiencing these kinds of things. And so Leslie and Frederick both mentioned that they came out as I think I understood you to say this, you came out as both non-binary and bisexual or something other than heterosexual. And so there's again these overlapping oppressions of like, you're experiencing, you could be experiencing the internalized oppression of like, is this okay for me as for my sexuality, on top of the oppression of gender, on top of race, on top of socioeconomics. And so all of these things are again influencing the experiences of what people may be going through. So I want to make sure that we get some time. I've lost my slides here. What are some of those positive outcomes that non-binary people face? Tell us some of the good stuff, and then we can talk about some of the challenges, but we are having such rich conversation. I want to make sure we get to those strategies before we lose time today.
Yeah, I can start us off. This is my favorite question that I've ever been asked, maybe in my whole life. But one of the main things as I was reflecting on this question that I was thinking a lot about was just being able to live outside of survival mode. That has been one of the biggest positive outcomes that I've personally experienced. And as I've like spoken to members of my community, friends, and so on, that's something that I can see just in the way that folks like, and myself included, we're no longer just trying to survive. We're just trying to like fit whatever the norm that we've been told to fit is. Because for me, I had tried that quite a lot when it came to my sexuality, when it came to my gender, and a lot of times felt very isolated, very alone, very shameful, and all of those heavy feelings that made it harder to even like experience joy and to be present and to be able to laugh and just know that I was okay, just like my existence, my humanity was okay. And with being out, with not even like, I think, yeah, with being out, as grateful as I am to be able to be in that position, I think for other folks too, who like, they know for themselves whether they've come out or not, like there's almost like a weight that's lifted off where you can actually just exist. You can feel more authentic and really like feel what that means rather than it just being a term. Instead, you can just exist beyond the day to day or just trying to get through whatever, get through work, get through school, and so on.
I love that, Leslie. I think for me, to like rewind just a little bit, one of the things that like helped me get to a place where like I did feel positively about not being non-binary was the fact that I have identified as bisexual since I was like 18. And like one of the things that I did throughout college to combat my own internalized biphobia, which is that's a whole other conversation on biphobia, was that anytime I met someone new, I was rewiring my thought process by saying they could be bisexual. I don't know. You can't make assumptions about people's like sexual orientation by looking at them. And so that like unlearning process, I was like helping kind of deconstruct the socialization for myself. And so when I got to the point where I started questioning my gender, once I got to the point where I was able to like think about how that worked for me and then kind of flip it back around and look at how I'm interacting with society, it helped me like decouple appearance and gender as well. And so now when I'm talking about strangers, I really, really, really try to use they, them pronouns for everybody because you can't know someone's gender. You can't guess someone's pronouns just by looking at them. And so I really make an effort to be like, oh, the person with the red coat, or like, that that person over there with the, black umbrella, whatever kind of describing I can do that doesn't make assumptions about their gender, helps me continue to like deconstruct all of the like systems of oppression that we are living under. And so the joyful aspect of that is, I feel like being non-binary and like accepting this for myself has made me more open to possibility in general. Like I'm just more open-minded, more open-hearted, and it helps me, and like having like living in that openness helps me hear other people's stories and like listen to them and believe them. And so when I am like doing work to like try to work against oppression, like it's a lot easier to like listen to and believe stories of people's oppression that like aren't my experience and that I didn't know existed. But because I have this like open framework that I like worked to cultivate, it's like, oh, okay, this is your experience. And so it makes it a lot easier to be in solidarity with other people.
Thank you both. Such beautiful examples, and we're getting some great feedback. So Pamela added in the chat, the shame and unlearning are difficult. And thank you both for sharing your experiences. Someone else also added to the Slido some great explanations. So to positive outcomes. So they said the ability to escape the trappings of binary expectations, the freedom to think and be outside the pressures of patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism, which allows you to meet other people without being an actor of those pressures. I love that. That actually gives me chills. It's really beautiful. Plus, being authentic to who you are, whatever that is, leads to a happier life because you get to live without playing a role someone else wrote for you. You get to write your present and future. And someone else added, like Leslie is saying, being able to validate yourself and surround yourself with people who accept you and validate you. And this actually reflects into society. Non-binary people break gender norms, which in turn breaks binary stereotypes. They're damaging our society. I would say that coming out allowed this person to overcome your internalized biphobia like Frederick, but also queer phobia. And they go on to share some other details. So once they came out as non-binary, allowed them to be themselves, and that reflected in allowing themselves to wear whatever they liked. So thank you both for those are anonymously posted, but I'm just really grateful for what you shared here. We're so close to running out of time, and oh my gosh, I had so many more questions, but what I want to make sure that we get to are I want us to talk about the strategies, like what are simple ways that we can be inclusive of non-binary people at work, at school, and in our communities.
I can start us off. So my background was actually working in higher education as a career coach at one point, and then also working at a LGBTQ center. So I'll speak a little bit to the schools part, specifically like college and up, with really being intentional about supporting or uplifting spaces that are for non-binary folks. There aren't a lot that exist. And if you're in a school system, if you are working at a college, if you're working wherever with students, where you can be part of creating safer spaces, and that can look like an ad hoc event. It could look like community gatherings specifically for trans and non-binary folks, like a monthly meeting or something like that. Something for and by gender non-conforming folks, I think, can have a really incredible impact in allowing folks to have community. Because a lot of times, especially as you're in school at whatever ages, like you may not feel like you fit the norm and may feel isolated. So just being intentional about doing whatever you can to support those spaces.
Thanks, Leslie and Frederick. While
Yeah.
everyone else, I want to encourage you to add your thoughts here, and I'm going to add them to the website after. So, Frederick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the need for like non-binary spaces is so real. Like even even on like social media where you can create groups for anything, like there are so few non-binary spaces. And having that community, like seeing other people like live their authentic lives and like use the names and the pronouns and the gender expression, the aesthetics that work for them, it really is life changing. And like I think part of the reason that it took me so long to come out was because I didn't see that many possibilities. And so one of the things that's important for me in like being visible is just helping other people like question like gender and stuff. And so like I have been very intentional about like my gender expression, which is different from my gender identity. And so I describe my my gender expression as curated chaos or curated confusion, depending on the day. But like I'm pretty femme looking. Like most people look at me and think that I'm a woman, but they would be wrong, which is one of the reasons that I go by my last name. I use the name Frederick, and then my pronouns are they, them. And so I have a masculine name and non-binary pronouns and a femme like gender expression. And so like that is very intentional to make people stop and think. So yeah, pronouns are obviously like one of the easiest ways. There's no reason that like any of your forms should only say male and female. Like also male and female, like are we specimens? Like what are we doing? There's so many. Yeah. Oh, I see like on the Slido, like policies on professionalism, like that's a whole other conversation too. Yeah, dress codes, like there's a ton of resources and links that I'm going to share in the chat too about this. But yeah, I mean, even just doing things like this, like if your organization, if your company offers training for your employees, like we all do this, like this is what we do, is training for people on these kinds of issues. And so we are happy to come in and talk to your organization about how to ungender your policies, how to be supportive of people. One of the things that I offer through my consulting business is mentorship for early career trans and non-binary folks, because it was life-changing for me to have a non-binary supervisor. And it's like, there's a lot of different things that we can do.
Yeah, if I can just add one thing, I know we're really close to time, but I think at the bare minimum, when I think about simple ways and strategies to be more inclusive, is none of this necessarily like our identities, gender, non-binary, trans, like you don't have to understand it in order to respect it. Like it doesn't need to make sense to you. And there are so many resources, as Frederick shared, like those will be shared as well. So many resources you can use to like better understand, but it doesn't, at the end of the day, someone's existence does not have to make sense to you in order for you to actually respect who they are and show like respect for their humanity.
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge we're at time. I don't have to go. I think my Leslie and Frederick might be willing to stick on for a few minutes, but I just want to give people a drop-off point if they have to leave. I want to thank you so much for sharing time with us today. I do welcome your feedback to help me improve the services that we offer at Engineering Inclusion. Also on the webpage, I have contact information for Frederick and Leslie. As Frederick mentioned, all of us are consultants in the DEI space. Leslie, Frederick specifically, her company, excuse me, I'm so sorry, Frederick, their company is Non-Binary Consulting. So they focus on this work specifically. And so I encourage you to reach out to both of them if you want to learn more. I want to jump back, just acknowledging that some people offered some great comments on some strategies that we could use. Lots of commentary on pronouns, right? It's something we all need to learn to do and to unlearn them too, right? We have to unlearn sometimes and literally rewire how we know and address people. I think a lot of this can also be served by just general challenging of gender stereotypes. The more that we reduce those stereotypes, the more normal it is going to be for all of us to operate in ways that are free of some of the systems that we've been sort of stuck to. So Eileen, thanks for your question. I've got those on my webpage. Leslie's adding theirs there in the chat, and I will email all of you. Not today, because Google has told me I cannot send any more emails today. I have met my limit. But tomorrow I will email all of you with a follow-up with the recording and all of the resources. And so also genderless toilets, and even if in your building you don't have power to do that, you can do that at conferences. That's something that's very easy to coordinate typically. I think the topic of professionalism is, as you suggested, that is a great workshop we could have on its own, just talking about how that is so deeply steeped in white supremacy and patriarchy, and what we determine to be professional. And I added a resource earlier on pronouns. That's a great tool, and there are lots of them out now, but that you can use to help understand that. And so let's go here. There is a question. What are your thoughts on cis people listing they as a secondary pronoun as a way to normalize it? Does this create problems where someone seems NB but isn't? I'd love to know your thoughts because I do that. So tell me.
I wasn't sure Frederick was unmuting or not, so I'll go first. But so this one is definitely a really good question and very tricky because oftentimes like don't question why folks are using they, them pronouns or any other pronouns. So a lot of times like I don't even know, but I think that I understand the intention for the folks that do share that with me in terms of wanting to be part of educating others, wanting to be part of, wanting to be part of raising awareness and building community. So I think that for me, I'm at a spot where like, if there is that intent, if there's that, that level of understanding and awareness about what it truly means to be gender non-binary, what it means to use they, them pronouns. I think that I'm at a spot where I feel comfortable. And I also know that that's my opinion. There are folks that I know who get very pissed off, rightfully so, just because for some, it's been a journey of just figuring out what their pronouns mean for them and being safe enough or feeling safe enough in order to actually like use it in the world. At least that has been like the rationale or the explanation that I've had access to. And like I get it for sure. So I think for me, like I might be an unpopular opinion where I'm like, okay, well, if you truly are doing the self-work, if you're not just using they, them pronouns, be like be popular or to like raise eyebrows or to do whatever like for attention, like I personally give grace. And also like don't feel any other way about like someone else being pissed off, because that also is very fair.
Yeah, I think this question is a great example of the fact that like the non-binary community is not a monolith. Like we don't all share the same brain. I am, so one of my undergraduate degrees is in linguistics, and I am not in the business of policing the language that people use for themselves. So if it doesn't matter what someone says their pronouns are, those are the pronouns that I'm going to use for them. And it is none of my business how they identify their gender. And like, as long as they're not like actively like harming the non-binary community, like I would almost want to like turn this question around and ask like if non-binary folks are upset when non-binary people use like binary pronouns, because we're saying like non-binary people don't owe anyone androgyny, so we don't have to be using they them pronouns. But like, are we going to be like uncomfortable with a non-binary person exclusively using he him pronouns? Like what's the point of this, like the gatekeeping?
Yeah.
There's a lot of gatekeeping in the LGBTQ community. And I think it's something that like we need to like externalize. And that's not what I mean.
Yeah. That was, so when I read the question, the first thing that came up, because one, it had never occurred to me as a cisgender person who uses, the they pronoun as this, it had never occurred to me that would be a problem. So I'm so grateful to actually know that perspective. But my immediate response was like, wow, that's gatekeeping, right? Like we want everyone to be authentic and free, but you can't be so free as to use these pronouns. And so so that I'm so grateful to know that I will be more sensitive to how how I use
I
my
mean,
language.
I
But
I appreciate you like taking this in and thinking about it as a cis person. I will also say I very much thought I was cis when I was in the process of looking at they them pronouns. And one of the misconceptions that I don't think we touched on earlier is that like being non-binary and using they them pronouns is like a stopover on your way to a binary like trans experience. Um, and that's the case for some people and that's not the case for other people, and if that's your path, that's valid, and if that's not your path, that's also valid. um, but I think like I'm a firm believer that like the more people who are questioning their own gender identity, the better. Like the more people who are questioning the gender binary, the better. So like whatever way that looks, however we can get people there, like I'm on board with all of those tactics.
yeah, and I agree. And so even if I were on a journey to, to be a non-binary identity, if people who are in the community continue to cause, create barriers for people, like how are we that is literally not practicing what we are trying to preach, authenticity and inclusion, and creating spaces for people to show up. And again, to me, so much of it is about normalizing language, and maybe also it's a tool for me to um, um, I feel like I'm speaking too much. I took no offense to this, but this is such an interesting question to me, and so I'm really grateful for whoever offered that. Um, we also kind
Yeah,
of skipped over. Oh, go ahead, Frederick.
there's a comment in the chat about this question. This is the perspective I've heard is someone perceived a cis person using they as safe to come out to, but then found out they weren't non-binary and felt betrayed. Um, and I think that that goes back to that assumption piece. Like we can't make assumptions about people's gender based on the pronouns they're using, based on their appearance, based on their name, like none of those things. Like you can't know someone's gender unless you have a relationship with them to where you can have these kinds of conversations. And so like as I will absolutely tell you that as a non-binary person, like deciding whether or not it's safe to come out to someone is a big fucking deal. And so I totally understand that. Like, oh, like I thought we were on the same page. Like I can see how that would be really like jarring. And I think that even as non-binary people, we have a responsibility to be questioning our assumptions about other people and their gender and like what we're assuming we know about people.
Mhm. So rich, thank you, and thanks, Alexandra, for your comments in the chat. I really appreciate that. I missed Lou's up here. So Lou said, I think they them should be normalized in general as a pronoun to use when you don't know someone's. Yeah, I mean, this is some as I said, I live in conservative Texas, not in the liberal Austin that Frederick experienced, although I have lived in Austin, but it's very different than where I live now. There is so much language of like, pushback of I just won't use that language, right? I just won't use they them. And really helping people to say like, what's your goal here? Is your goal to live an existence where only you are comfortable? What does it hurt you to use the words that someone asks you to use, right? And really helping people to think about these things. I like what Frederick's approach of giving your parents shirts. I think if I were to ever do that to my parents, oh gosh, what might happen? And so, what I hope that whoever's listening, whoever's here with us, that you're able to find community, that you're able to find space to connect with others. If you are in a space where you are questioning and curious, I know any of us would be happy to chat with you, and just create space and community for you to talk through that. And let's look at some more comments here in the chat until someone forgets their umbrella. Um,
That was in response to like people being like, oh, I just won't use those pronouns, like da da da, except that we use them all the time, like every day in our regular lives. And it's only when people like are like stuck in that socialization piece that they're like, wait, I can't use that for someone whose gender I think I know. Bullshit.
Yeah. Alexander, thanks so much for your comment. I see you got to hop off. And I want to, one of the things that's important to me as a practitioner is to model the struggle. And so I will admit, someone who is close in my, um, circle, I have known this person since they were a freshman in high school. They were actually one of the case studies in my dissertation, and so I know them very intimately because like I spent a lot of time writing their story, and they've been in my life for a long time. And then they became my dog sitter when they were in college, and so finally I asked this person, I said, do the pronouns that I've used for you forever still work for you? Because I didn't think that they did. And they revealed to me, yes, I would love it if you'd use they them pronouns. But it has been so fucking hard, right? For me, not because I don't love this person, not because I don't care about them, but because I'm literally having to rewire those neural pathways. And so, why I'm saying this to admit it is that it isn't a switch that people can just switch and say the right pronoun. And so, if you are a person who is trying to be inclusive, who's trying to use the right pronouns, give yourself grace to know like you're literally rewiring the neural pathways and how you see and work and connect with this person. And so it takes effort. It isn't just a switch that you're going to be able to turn off. And then, I wonder too, Frederick and Leslie, tell me what I have asked my friend. I said, please correct me if I'm missing it. I'm working really hard to get it right, but I want you to feel safe to tell me. What does that feel like to you when someone says that? Is that a good thing to say?
So I've personally experienced, yeah, even in the like work world, I had a supervisor at one point who never used they them pronouns, and I like had started working with him at the time where I was using they she pronouns, and then had transitioned into just using they them pronouns, and still even with that never used the correct pronouns, never even acknowledged that that was happening. And it like that was very frustrating because I was like, it got to a point where I was like, I feel like you have to know. Like at some point you have to know, you have to like know or just don't care. So that's been like one side of my experience with folks kind of not approaching pronouns correctly. And I've had other experiences where similar to what you've been doing, folks have like actually named it and like said, this is something that I know I'm like, it's a shortcoming. I know that I'm not doing well with this. I know that I need to do better. And like I've appreciated it. And yeah, I've appreciated it. And when there's like weeks or months or years and it's still like the same messaging and no like change, I think that's where I personally reach my breaking point. When they're like when the actions aren't lining up with the intent, I think that's when I get to okay, so like what other strategies can you use so that we don't need to like come back to this acknowledgement without the action part?
Yeah, I think for me, the hardest part is like with people who don't like notice when they're using pronouns at all. Like, like they do. So like they're not, it's not that they're like even in a place where they're like trying to use the right pronouns. It's that they like aren't like thinking about pronouns as a like grammar component. Like, so like don't realize when pronouns happen. Um, so that's
Spoken like someone
a
who
thing.
studied linguistics.
Right. And so like that's a thing that I'm working on with my mom in particular. And I told her, this is important to me. This is something that I need you to do, and I'm going to work on it. But I was talking with my therapist about like how do I correct people, because most of the time it's not that the pronouns happen and then like the sentence stops, and then I can jump in and be like, oh, by the way, my entire life I've like fought against like my ADHD brain to not interrupt people. And so now like having a legitimate excuse and like imperative to interrupt people to correct them, like I am not overriding that for myself yet. And so like that's something that I'm working on. But my mom is an amazing person and quite a character. And so I was trying to think of like ways that I could like correct her that would like fit with her personality and our relationship. And I'm like 95% sold on the idea of just getting like one of those like party noisemakers. And just like every time she like says the wrong pronoun, I'll just like make noise instead of like actually like saying something, because for whatever reason, like using my voice versus just making noise is a totally different thing. And I
It's like a
think that,
Pavlovian response, right? Like
right,
you need.
exactly. Like pronouns, like, so yeah, I'm gonna work on that. Um, with my partner, we, when I started using they, them pronouns exclusively, it was a conversation that we had to have. I had to like sit my partner down and be like, hey, this is what it feels like when you're using these wrong pronouns. Like it physically feels like pins and needles. It's prickly. Like I'm physically uncomfortable when people use these pronouns for me. And it makes me like feel like I have to like retreat, and it makes me feel unsafe. And I don't want to feel that way around you. And I think like having that conversation with my partner so that like my feelings were understood and my perspective was understood was really helpful. And then from that point on, my partner was really intentional in saying like, I don't notice, like if I'm not noticing when I'm doing it, please do like bring it to my attention. And so having like been given that space to make the correction, I think really made a difference. And so I was able to like start pointing it out, and so like now, like if the wrong pronoun gets said, I just say they, like just like throw it out like I'm a little minor bird, like they. But the other thing that helped is that we started using they them pronouns for our dog. So we have another person to talk about, another person, no, my dog. She's human too. But yeah, Kalua uses they she pronouns. And having someone else to practice on and to like regularly like hear those pronouns, say those pronouns, like rewire that part of our brain has been really helpful, even for me. And that's one of the things that I recommend to people when I'm doing these kinds of trainings, is to practice pronouns that you're not familiar with on your pets and your plants, because their feelings aren't going to be hurt as long as you give them food and water. And the other thing, especially, so it's one thing, like I think for a lot of people, when you meet someone and they say, my pronouns are they, them, and it's the first time you've met them, you don't have those neural pathways already like carved into your brain that are like, this is the pronoun. But it's harder to make the switch. And so one of the things that I recommend is not just practicing Z her pronouns on your plants, it's to practice switching pronouns for things that you have like in your everyday life too. And so if you normally use she her pronouns for your dog, switch to he him. Like make that change and do that for 6 months until you get it right, and then do it again and change it to something else. Like it's hard, but if you practice it, you'll get better at it.
Yeah, my dog is 15, and she's deaf and blind, so she can't hear anymore. But people always ask, because that's like what they do, is like, is it a boy or a girl? And I'm like, well, she's a girl, but she doesn't subscribe to gender norms. And everyone always looks at me really funny, and I'm like, she's a dog. She does not subscribe to gender norms. Like it doesn't matter what gender she is. And it's so funny to interact with people. They're like, but she has on a blue collar, and I'm like, yes, yes, she does. And I'm like, this is a dog, folks, right? Like, what do we think about people? And so again, trying to I want to acknowledge Lou's added some great commentary to the chat. But actually, before I do that, Frederick, I want to thank you for describing what it feels like to be misgendered, because I think that for others, for myself, for the audience, I think that's really important to know. It's not just a word. It really creates a sense of psychological and physiological, you don't feel safe in that. And so thank you for describing what that feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like my like mindfulness practice has been helpful in that, but then I've also been active in like doing like anti-racism work, especially like in community with other white folks for years at this point. And one of the pieces of doing equity work is recognizing like how your body is reacting to this perceived danger and this perceived threat. And it really kind of takes you out of your headspace, and it's like, okay, like, are you noticing your heart racing? Is your stomach doing flips? Are your hands sweaty? Is your face flushed? And being able to like recognize those physiological symptoms, whether you are a white person who's getting uncomfortable because we're talking about race, or whether you are someone who is being misgendered, or whether you are actually like being threatened because of your, you know, like some kind of marginalized identity that you have. Like those are important things to be able to notice, because they serve a purpose. And so if you are a marginalized person and you're like out in the world and you start to notice that like your stomach is queasy, like that's a sign that like you are probably not safe, and like you need to listen to your body and like make a change, like figure out what your surroundings are. You know, with being misgendered, it's one of those things where like I know that like for the most part, like because of my immense white privilege, like I'm not usually actually unsafe. I may be psychologically unsafe. I may not like feel like I can share and open up and be like my true like human self with this person, but like most of the time, like I'm not in physical danger. But then like, yeah, so there's a lot of things that go into somatics and like understanding your body and like the physical reaction and response to these things. But it's something that I really encourage folks to look into, is like mindfulness and somatics, and like how those things can be helpful in learning and unlearning and doing this like anti-oppression work.
Yeah. I want to connect back to something you said earlier, Leslie, as well, is that we don't have to understand it to respect people. And admittedly, again, one of my key values is transparency and modeling the journey. And so I will admit, you know, because I mentioned earlier I was a power lifter, and there was a lot of talk in, especially in Texas and other states, around trans kids and students and competing in these sports. And so I have to admit, like, I've really struggled as a former athlete in that space, like as a human and as a practitioner. I know full well how much I love and value and respect and work towards people showing up as their full identities. But I also recognize that I have this weird conflict from my past as an athlete there. And so, but I know that I don't have to understand the full experience and identity of something. And I have a PhD in this stuff, folks, right? And so like I know people are like, well, there's a big gap there. And I just want the audience to always recognize is that, you know, what we're trying to boil this work down is dignity, respect, humanity, and treating people the way they want to be treated, right? Like the platinum rule, not the golden rule. And in order to do that, you know, when we think about our work environments, our classroom environments, whatever kind of environment that you're in, I firmly believe that we have a responsibility to be thoughtful to the people around us. And we can either choose to contribute to a space where people feel valued and affirmed and they belong, or we can choose not to, right? And so again, when it comes to understanding people who are identifying as non-binary or trans, or maybe they're early on their journey, as Frederick suggested, you know, like just giving people space and grace and love, and being really open and respectful to that. I think, you know, Frederick, you also shared that on your journey in this work that it's allowed you to be, I translated what you said to be like, it's allowed you to be a more open, kind, empathetic, aka a better human. And I fully agree. If that's what you were meaning, that's really what this work has meant for me, because it's allowed me to be more accepting, more empathetic, um, to all lived identities. But there is this other piece to it of like, it's not just about awareness. We have to take some action to understand the ways in which we may be complicit and upholding systems that continue to disallow people to wrestle with their gender identity, to present in the gender identity that they want. And so we have to take some action within our sphere of influences to begin to make some change. Yeah. And so again, Lou, really appreciate you had some great comments here. And again, I admit my discomfort with some of that conversation around sports, just to model that we don't always have to fully understand things to be able to still vote and support in ways that still help those students, and to help people be themselves. So we've really pushed our time so much longer than I asked Frederick and Leslie. So I need to respect their time because they need to move on with their day. But I want to acknowledge Pamela and Lou and Christina. Thanks for hanging with us for so long. I appreciate all the comments that you've added in the chat. And so Frederick and Leslie, any final words? Feel free to plug your work, drop those links in the chat. And again, I'll share those on the website as well. So final thoughts, and then we're going to end the recording today.
Frederick, I keep thinking you're gonna unmute, so I'll go again. But I think the final thought that I'll leave everyone is Megan, as you said, like we're either intentionally involved in creating a safe space or we're not, and there isn't really an in between for anyone. And also, folks who identify as non-binary, identify as trans, like they know and feel who their supporters, who our supporters are. So as you're in your workplace, as you're in your schools, as you're in your communities, like know that you have a role to play, and it can be pro-supportive or very oppressive and discriminatory, and there isn't an in-between. Inaction it's not in between. If anything, it's towards discrimination.
Yeah, 100%. Like, yeah, when I'm gonna mangle it, but when we remain silent in the face of oppression, we side with the oppressor.
Yes, that was the quote I was thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I got it right, but
that goes to Janetta Sagan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation. It's been so wonderful. I always love and appreciate the chance to talk with other non-binary folks, and it's so helpful to like hear and see like my experience reflected in someone else, and like learn other aspects of it. It feels really like kaleidoscopic. I have a consulting firm called Nonbinary Consulting, and I do training and like policy revision, mentorship, speaking engagements for companies and nonprofits who want to create thriving relationships with their LGBTQIA+ staff and clients. And if you have questions about how to make this happen for your organization, consultations are always free. There's also, my favorite part of my website is there's a page on my website called Community Input, where you, my dear queer family, can recommend someone for training. And so you can go in and tell on people and be like, oh, I've been misgendered at this bakery every time I've been in there. Or like my doctor's office, like ask for my pronouns on my forms, but they never use them. And all of that information will be kept confidential, but I will reach out to these businesses and let them know that they have been recommended for training because they have stepped in it with the LGBTQIA+ community. So definitely use the form, share it.
I like that.
Yeah, share it around. Happy to be the one to like hold people accountable on behalf of the community.
Awesome. All right. Well, Leslie and Frederick, thank you again so much for your time, your expertise, and it's been really fun talking and getting to know you. So with that, I'm going to end the recording, and I'm going to open the waiting room back up. And if anybody's still hanging out, I want to push you there because I want to have a chance to debrief with my speakers today. But again, thanks so much. Check the website. We're going to have all the resources curated today saved up there, and I should have that live tomorrow. Thank you so much.